Welcome to the Cheating Infidelity. Did you know over 90% of our viewers don't subscribe? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit that like button. We're targeting 500 likes on this one. Let's dive into today's tale. I never thought I'd be telling my story like this, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and you find yourself reflecting on choices you never imagined making. My name is Eleanor, and for the past 10 years, I have been married to a man I once believed was my soulmate. His name is Richard, and for a long time we were happy. Or at least, I convinced myself that we were. Richard was everything I thought I wanted. Strong, responsible, kind, at least in the beginning. We built a life together, a home filled with laughter and routine. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was the weight of responsibilities, or maybe we just stopped trying. Whatever it was, our love slowly faded into something distant, like a song playing in another room. Still there, but barely noticeable. It wasn't just one moment that changed everything. It was small things, the way he came home from work and barely looked at me. The way our conversations became about logistics, what groceries to buy, who would take the car in for servicing. He stopped asking how my day was, and I stopped expecting him to. We became two people sharing the same space, but living separate lives. And then there was Daniel. Daniel had been Richard's friend for years. I'd known him for just as long, but only in passing. He was the kind of person who lit up a room when he walked in, always full of stories and laughter. He wasn't just Richard's friend. He was someone people naturally gravitated toward. He had a warmth about him that made people feel seen. I don't remember when I first started noticing him differently. Maybe it was at one of our dinner gatherings when he asked me how I was doing, and for the first time in what felt like years, someone actually waited for my answer. Or maybe it was the way he listened, not just nodding along, but really listening. He noticed things, like when I changed my hair or when I looked exhausted. Richard never noticed those things anymore. At first I dismissed it. Daniel was just being kind. He was friendly with everyone. But over time, something shifted. There were glances that lingered a little too long, conversations that felt heavier than they should. I felt drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain, and I hated myself for it. I tried to suppress it. I reminded myself that I was married, that Daniel was Richard's friend. But the more I ignored it, the more obvious it became. And then came the night that changed everything. It was Richard's birthday. We had a small gathering at our house, just a few close friends. Richard was preoccupied, as he often was, talking about work and sports with the others. Daniel, however, was different. He noticed when I stepped away to refill drinks, followed me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping, and then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and terrifying, he looked at me in a way that left no doubt about what we were both feeling. I don't know what I expected, but nothing happened that night. No words were spoken about the tension between us, but something had changed. I knew it, and so did he. Days passed, and I found myself thinking about him more often than I should. Every interaction felt charged. Every conversation carried unspoken words. And then, one afternoon, he called me. "I was just checking in," he said. "You seemed a little off at the party." I wanted to tell him that he was imagining things, that everything was fine, but I couldn't. Instead, I sighed. "It's nothing, just, things at home." There was a pause before he spoke again. "You can talk to me, Eleanor. You don't have to pretend." And just like that, the walls I had built around myself began to crumble. I found myself confiding in him in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. I told him about the distance between Richard and me, about how lonely I felt even when I wasn't alone. He listened without judgment, without offering solutions. He just listened, and somehow that was enough. Looking back, I wonder if I could have stopped things from escalating, if I had been stronger, more disciplined. But the truth is, I didn't want to stop. I wanted to feel something again. I wanted to be seen. One evening, Richard had a late meeting at work. Daniel called, asking if I wanted to grab a coffee. I hesitated, but only for a moment. We sat at a quiet cafe talking like old friends. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not the forced kind of laughter I had perfected over the years, but real, unfiltered laughter. and Daniel smiled, watching me like I was the only person in the world. "I've missed seeing you happy," he said softly. I looked away because looking at him felt too dangerous. But I felt it, the shift, the unspoken understanding between us. I don't know when it became more than friendship, when I started looking forward to his calls more than I should. But I do know that something had awakened in me, something I thought had died a long time ago. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, we were just talking, just two people finding comfort in each other's company. But deep down, I knew better. And then one evening, everything changed. Richard was away for a business trip. I was home alone, and Daniel stopped by to drop off something Richard had left at his place. It was a harmless visit, or at least that's what I told myself. But when I opened the door and saw him standing there, I knew. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking, and then he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. And that was the moment I crossed a line I could never uncross. I wish I could say I hesitated. That I thought about my marriage, about Richard, about the life we had built. But the truth is, in that moment, none of it mattered. It was as if I had been walking through life in a fog. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I could see clearly. Daniel stood there, just a few steps away, his eyes searching mine. Neither of us said a word. We didn't have to. The silence between us was heavy with everything we had never spoken aloud. And then, just like that, the distance between us disappeared. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, guilt, exhilaration, fear. I told myself that it had been a mistake, that it couldn't happen again. But the problem with crossing a line is that once you do, it becomes easier to step over it again and again. Daniel and I became something I never intended us to be. What started as stolen moments turned into something I couldn't walk away from. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. With him, I wasn't just Richard's wife, I was Eleanor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that meant something. I don't know how long I thought I could keep it a secret. Maybe a part of me believed that if I was careful, if I played my role as the devoted wife well enough, Richard would never suspect a thing. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. And no matter how careful we were, the cracks were already forming. It started with small things. Richard would come home and look at me a little differently, as if trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't know existed. He started asking questions he had never asked before, where I had been, who I had seen. I told myself I was just imagining it, that he had no reason to suspect anything. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, I was sitting in the living room when Richard walked in and stood in the doorway. His expression was unreadable. "You've been different lately," he said after a moment. I forced a smile. "Different how?" He shrugged. I don't know, distracted, like your mind is somewhere else." My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my expression calm. "I've just been busy." He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly before turning and walking away. That was the moment I realized I was living on borrowed time. I told Daniel we needed to be more careful, that we couldn't risk getting caught. But the problem was, the more we tried to stay away from each other, the more impossible it became. He was like a pull I couldn't resist, and every time we were apart, I felt the weight of his absence like a physical ache. Then came the night that changed everything. Richard had been out late for work, and I had spent the evening with Daniel. We had promised to be careful, to avoid unnecessary risks, but when I came home that night, Richard was waiting for me. He was sitting in the kitchen, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't say anything as I walked in, just watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're home late," he said finally. I swallowed hard. "I was out with some friends." "Friends?" he repeated, nodding slowly. "And would one of those friends happen to be Daniel?" A chill ran down my spine. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Richard let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I'm not an idiot, Eleanor. I know something's going on." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Richard, He held up a hand, cutting me off. Just don't." For the first time in years, he looked at me in a way that made my stomach twist. There was no anger in his eyes, no betrayal, just exhaustion, like he had known all along and had simply been waiting for me to confirm it. "How long?" he asked after a moment. I hesitated, then whispered, "A few months?" He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I see." A heavy silence filled the room. I wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize, but what could I possibly say that would make this better? Finally, Richard stood up and walked toward the door. "I don't want to talk about this right now," he said. "I just need some time." And then he was gone, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been caught, and I had no idea what would happen next. The days after Richard confronted me were some of the longest of my life. He didn't speak to me unless necessary. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't demand answers. He simply existed next to me, as if I were a stranger he had once known. That was what hurt the most, not his anger, but his silence. I tried to talk to him once. I sat beside him on the couch, my hands twisting in my lap. "Richard, Don't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to hear an apology. It won't change anything." He was right. Nothing I said could undo what I had done. I didn't see Daniel during that time. I knew it wasn't safe. And to be honest, I wasn't sure what I even wanted anymore. The excitement, the escape, none of it seemed worth it when faced with the reality of what I had done to my marriage. Then one evening, Richard came home with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He set them on the table and sat down across from me. "Drink with me," he said. I hesitated. "Richard, Just drink with me." So I did. We sat in silence for a long time, the ice in our glasses melting slowly. Finally, he looked up at me. "Do you love him?" The question sent a sharp pain through my chest. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that Daniel had meant nothing, that it had been a mistake, but I couldn't lie to him anymore. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't think it was ever about that." Richard nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Then why?" I exhaled shakily. "Because I felt invisible. Because I needed something to remind me that I was still alive." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "And I made you feel that way?" Tears burned my eyes. "I'm not blaming you, Richard. This isn't about what you did or didn't do. It's about me, about the choices I made." He stared at his drink for a long time before finally speaking. "I knew," he admitted. "Long before I asked you that night, I saw the way you looked at him, the way he looked at you." A lump formed in my throat. "Why didn't you say anything?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Because I didn't want to believe it. Because admitting it would mean admitting that we weren't us anymore." A heavy silence settled between us. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "So, where do we go from here?" I shook my head. "I don't know." But Richard did. The next day, he handed me a stack of papers, divorce papers. "I don't want to fight," he said. "I don't want revenge. I just want to move on." I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. "Is this really what you want?" "I don't think it matters what I want," he said softly. "We can't go back." And he was right. We couldn't. The day I signed those papers was the day I realized how much I had lost. Not just my marriage, but the version of myself I used to be. Daniel and I didn't last. Maybe we were never meant to. Maybe we were only ever a temporary escape for each other. It's been a year since everything fell apart. I live alone now, in a small apartment with too much quiet and too many memories. I think about Richard sometimes, about the life we had, the life we lost. I wonder if he ever thinks about me. If I could go back, if I could change things, would I? I don't know. But I do know this. Love isn't just about passion or excitement. It's about choosing someone every single day, even when things get hard. And I stopped choosing. That was my biggest mistake. And I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. Richard moved on faster than I expected. I heard through mutual friends that he started dating again a few months after our divorce. A part of me wanted to feel hurt, but I knew I had no right. He deserved happiness, even if it wasn't with me. As for Daniel, we tried. For a short while, we pretended that what we had was real, that it wasn't just built on secrecy and stolen moments. But the truth was, once the thrill of sneaking around was gone, there wasn't much left. We weren't in love, we were just two people who had made a mistake. It ended quietly, without much drama, just a mutual understanding that we had been chasing something that was never really there. Now I spend a lot of time alone, not because I have to, but because I need to. I've realized that before I can love anyone again, I need to learn to live with myself, to understand the choices I made and the consequences they brought. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Richard ever thinks about me. If he remembers the good times, or if all that's left in his mind is the way it ended. I wonder if, in another life, we would have made it. But this isn't another life. This is the one I chose, and now I have to live with it.